everybody, happy Sunday. I hope that wherever you are and whatever you are doing, you are having an amazing weekend. It is snowing. I know it's April 1st or April 2nd when you're watching this, or maybe it's later in that same week, but I'm actually recording this a full week before this video goes out because I and the rest of the team are on our way back from California. We've been filming there this past week. And so I wanted to record my chicken and garden and Sunday musing before we left. So we had less to do on the road. And it's snowing. It's kind of funny because the week before I filmed this, so 2 weeks ago at your point of watching this, we were filming the Kia EV6 GT review, which went live on the channel last week. If you haven't seen it already, go and watch it. It's really good. And it was a beautiful sunny week. We had a couple of days of rain, but Michael was able to film in really nice weather. We were able to film the review in really nice weather, and it started raining almost immediately after we had finished reviewing the car. And then I was thinking, oh, I should probably put the summer tyres on my F-150 Lightning because obviously driving down to California, it would be better not to have the winter tyres in quite warm weather as it is in San Diego right now. And it's snowing. And it's snowing in the Siskiyou Pass, which we have to go over obviously twice, once on the way down and once on the way back. And I looked to see what the weather forecast was for Siskiyou, and then it was like, oh, there's snow coming to your area at the weekend. And it's quite a lot of snow, look. That's not a small amount of snow, and it's that kind of fluffy stuff that is just below freezing and it kind of gets everywhere. And poor Michael had to drive to the studio today. Normally he doesn't drive when it snows. We just say, hey, take a day off or work from home. But because this is the last work day before our trip on Monday, he's had to come in, and he had a heck of a job getting here in his Volt because his Volt does not have winter tyres. So how he's going to get home today, I have no idea, because it's added a couple of inches of snow since he arrived at 8 a.m. Anyway, that is not what I want to talk to you about today. What I want to talk to you about today is America's problem with public transit, and specifically, does America have a prejudice towards public transit? And I think the answer is yes. Obviously, for as long as the motor car has been produced, ever since Henry Ford introduced the production line for the Model T, America's auto industry has tried to discourage the use of public transit. General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, they've all been involved in either direct campaigning, lobbying, or in the case of GM, actually purchasing public transit and then taking it apart and stopping it. And that was obviously an attempt to try and encourage people to buy private cars and to go with cars rather than buses and trains and trams and trolley buses. And I feel that in order for us to take anthropogenic climate change seriously, in order for us to transition away from fossil fuels and towards more affordable, equitable forms of transport, we do need public transit to make a comeback. But if you talk to most Americans about public transit, their impressions are pretty negative. They will talk about crime or safety issues, other safety issues on trains and buses. If you talk to someone in America about long distance buses, the joke often comes up that you meet the future mass murderers of America on a Greyhound bus. When you talk about long distance trains, you're looked at strangely as if you're someone who is a bit weird and maybe not somebody who is a person who would exist in a normal society. You're treated as a bit of an outsider. And while, you know, there is that stereotype that if you are a trained person, then you are a bit neurodivergent and maybe other people stay clear of you, There are some really good train routes in America. If you live in the San Francisco Bay Area, if you live on the East Coast, trains are much more common on the East Coast, especially if you're going between, say, Washington, D.C. and New York. That's a fairly well-served and well-operated rail network most of the time. But out here in the West, it's very weird. Trains are kind of viewed with a little bit of mistrust and a little bit of disdain. And I personally once took a train to a press launch event for the Chevrolet Bolt, the 2020 Chevrolet Bolt EV. They held a regional press event in 2019, and we had to drive from Olympia back to Portland, Oregon, and it was a one-day event. I actually took the train up, and my experience of the train was very interesting, because I grew up in the UK, I grew up with British Rail, I grew up with being able to take a train to France, and so I entered into that with the same expectations that I had for rail travel in Europe, which was a fairly quick, convenient service that was faster than taking a car. But what I was met with was quite a slow rail experience on a train that was quite old, on rails that were very old and under repaired, or not really looked after, perhaps. Because in America, the rail networks are often owned by freight rail companies. So they're the ones who maintain, and they're the ones who take priority. You very often have to stop and wait for a freight train. Whereas in Europe, it's the other way around. If you're a freight train operator, you have to wait for a passenger service to go past before you can carry on your journey. And while that train trip from Portland up to Olympia was pleasant enough, it took a lot longer than it did in a car. And I can understand why people at face value don't necessarily want to take a train, because the train networks are not invested in. And the history books are littered, in America at least, with tales of business owners and independents who have gone in to try and build specific rail networks, only for those rail networks to fail or run out of money or become acquired by someone else and eventually fizzle out. And I wonder how much of that is down to public perception of public transit. The same is true for buses, by the way. And if you live outside of a metro area, bus services are sporadic and unreliable. I fear that in some parts of the UK that is becoming the same problem. And I don't know about the rest of the world, so you'll have to forgive me. But in a world where we need public transit in order to become lower carbon, don't we first need to address some of the issues and some of the prejudices that people have with public transit? And are those prejudices valid? I know that in America, public safety always comes up, especially when talking about trains and buses. Or are they urban legends, urban myths that have been perpetuated by legacy automakers decades ago, wanting to try and encourage people to jump behind the wheel of a car? Because I know if I had a choice between getting in a car and driving 100 miles to a local town or city and being stuck in traffic and having to find somewhere to park and pay for parking because it's a big city, or being stuck in traffic for hours if there was an accident or a problem, versus being able to jump on a train at a local railway station, to jump on an electric, modern, fast train that could go a lot quicker than cars could safely travel, that could get me there in half the time, where I could, sit at a chair with a table and work, or browse the internet and drink a coffee, or just watch the scenery go by. I know which one I would prefer. And back in Europe, I would regularly try and take the train rather than fly, because I enjoyed the experience of being on a train more than I enjoyed the experience of flying. And I love flying. It's just all of the faff that you have to go through security, check your bags and all of that. None of that is something you have to worry about. Certainly in Europe, on a train. I know in America you generally have to check your bags, but it's slightly different and less stress and less hassle. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I watched a lot of Sam Downey's videos over the winter, where he did a lot of trips. He's a Canadian guy who does a lot of railway travel trips, and It's just been really interesting to experience through his eyes how different railways are compared to the stereotypical image that is, I think, pervasive amongst most Americans today. And I often wonder if your average American got to experience the train once or twice, would that encourage them to take trains more? Anyway, let me know your thoughts, and if you'd like to do that, you can do that by leaving a comment in our Discord chat room. You could send us a toot on Mastodon, not a non-smelly toot, please, and also by leaving a comment if you are a Patreon supporter at our Patreon page. If you would like to become a Patreon supporter, you're more than welcome to. There's a link below. You can also hit the join button on YouTube to become a channel member, and of course we'll also leave a link down below to our Ko-fi Bitcoin swag store and of course the aforementioned Mastodon server. Scrolling on my right is the list of amazing charged up supporters, and shout outs go out to our self-driving tier supporters. They are Mike Weeder, Denny Hyde, Linda Irish, Lance Schlall, Mark Erkelton, Cyprian Laplace, John Tremmell, Alan Tupper, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Sean Tucker, Pedro Mora Pinheiro, Kyle Hodgson, Tony Moss, Brophy Wolf, Kyle Fox, Hay Esker, Tasla in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C., Stefan Framgen and Stephen Williams, Regine Fellows, Chris Asental and Jim Burness, and finally out of this world thanks to our top tier supporters. They are John L. Henderson, Clay Witt, CPU Freak 101, John Lyons, Kevin Burrbridge, Andrew Glenn, Joe Hughes, Dave Kitchen, Joe Bresney, Nigel S., Matthew Drobnek, Eric Knack, Paul Conway, Stephen O'Donoghue, JP Fagerback, Reggie Watts, Marcel Ward, Robert Flannery, Aaron Hahn, Rory Litwin, Ellery Hensley, Will Graylin and Ian. Don't forget that we produce content every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, plus of course Saturday, and then over here on Sunday on Take 2 with our Chicken and Garden update and our Sunday Musing, hopefully with less snow. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving.